Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Great Lakes. I'm your host, Jeff Liskay, aka Great Lakes Dude. Well, I hope you enjoyed the last episode with Darcy Egan, longtime plain dealer editor for the sports section, longtime friend. But this episode is going to get pretty interesting. If you're listening and want to hear information about the southern shores of Lake Erie and what's going on in the famous Steelhead Alley, aka Rainbow Alley, I have a longtime friend and the active president from the Ohio Central Basin Steelheaders. We are going to dive into what's going on with the programs, what to expect in the next 4 or 5 years. We're going to talk about lampreys. We're going to talk about some fishing. We're just going to talk about everything to bring you up to date. And Tom is the guy. And it seems like only yesterday in 1984 that I was sitting at the rod maker's shop in Strongsville, Ohio, and I was on a steering committee of 12. The owner, Don Gunlean, wanted us to start a Steelhead program and a club. And he was the driving force that started it. And then a good friend of mine, Mike Spinullo, bless his soul, he's now not with us, but he was the first president. And we were not involved with Ohio at all. We were a chapter of the Michigan Steelheaders for the first couple years. But it seems like just yesterday that I was sitting in a basement, and now Tom is at the helm of this great club that is advanced 200 folds 40 years later. And I'm proud to present him today. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jeff. Like you said, I'm the current president of the OCBS. I joined OCBS back in 1990, and I really moved here from Pittsburgh. Didn't know a whole lot about steelhead fishing or anything back then, but I would often see in the newspaper stories about Jeff Liskay and Mike Spinullo chasing steelhead all around Ohio and Pennsylvania, and thought, boy, this is pretty good. Actually, I originally wanted to start fishing for salmon. But then a couple of my buddies said, oh, you don't want to catch those salmon. You want to kill steelhead. They got a much better fight and they're a lot more fun to catch. So started fishing for them in 1990, and it just became an addiction maybe, or a passion is probably more it. And I've been fishing for them ever since. I joined the Ohio Central Basin Steelheaders back in about 1990. And like I said, I moved from Pittsburgh, didn't really know anybody here, and it was a great way to be able to meet other like-minded anglers out in Ohio to network with and learn about the fishery. I became vice president in 1998, and I was vice president under Joe Moravec, was our president prior to that till 2016, and then 2016 to present. I've been the president, and it is a lot of work, but it is a lot of fun too. There's a lot of great things that we were able to do.
Tom, I can't think all the work that all the past presidents have did and how much we've advanced. And I think as we dive into what the club really does is I think it's really important for people to understand that any fishing club, the board and the president and the vice president and all the volunteers, this is a non-paid volunteer position. Tom and all the past presidents put in hundreds of hours a year to make these clubs successful. And when we started the club and our goal was to get more fish stock because the program was not really strong. And then Tom's leading the charge to make sure it continues that way. But Tom, why don't you give us a little of intel, about the club, where we're at members-wise and things like that, man?
Yeah, we're currently at 330 members, which is really our all-time high. There's a lot of interest in steelhead fishing. As I know, if you go out on the rivers, you could see lots of people out there fishing for them. But our club really is trying to promote and protect the steelhead fishery. We're really trying to work with the Division of Wildlife, with landowners, with the scenic river groups, different people to protect and promote the steelhead fishing. The club focuses on angler education, river conservation, and river access. Those are some of our primary things we work on. And really, the Ohio Division of Wildlife has really created a great fishery here in Ohio for us to enjoy. Some of our activities, we start out the year with our OCBS Fishing Expo, and we've actually been doing that also for 30 years. We always hold it in September. The first 10 were actually held at the Penitentiary Glen facility in Lake County, and actually back then we called it the Steelhead Conclave. And then because of some construction things, we couldn't have it there. So we moved, at that point, we moved to the Rocky River Nature Center in North Olmsted, and we've been having it there for the last 20 years. It's a great facility. There's a lot of room there for vendors to set up. We always have 8 hours of steelhead seminars from the top anglers. We try to cover all the different techniques. We'll have the Division of Wildlife give an update on the steelhead fishery, and we'll have seminars on how to catch steelhead, both with the fly and spin, center pin, as well as spay fishing. So we try to have something for everyone. And it kicks off the steelhead season. Right about then is when the fish start poking in the lower sections of the rivers. We have also a great group of vendors, conservation groups, and fishing clubs. A lot of fly tying there, demonstrations going on, and a lot of vendors there to sell you and demonstrate all the latest products in steelhead fishing. But that kicks off the season. Then we have monthly meetings from September to April. We split those meetings between the east and the west side. Our east side location is the Firehouse in Willoughby Hills. Our west location is actually at the mouth of the Rocky River at the Rocky River Emerald Necklace Marina, and both are very nice facilities. And for each meeting, we try to bring in a very good speaker, someone that's going to, help our members learn about how to catch steelhead, as well as, some conservation topics we go over as well. We have an excellent Christmas party. That's the one meeting that we don't have actually a speaker at, but it's a great time to celebrate the holidays and have some camaraderie with your fellow fishing buddies. And we hold that at the Winking Lizard in Bedford Heights each year. Another popular item that we do is we have our catch and release steelhead tournament, and we've been doing that probably for 40 years. And it's evolved over the years, but right now it is 5 separate events. We have 2 in November, 1 in December, and then 2 in March. And like I said, it's a catch and release tournament. You have to fish with a buddy, and they verify your catch. And then the top 6 fish that you catch throughout the 5 days, the 5 tournament dates, are what's used to determine the winner. And the winner gets a small prize, but gets bragging rights and gets the plaque, or a silver buckle is the other option.
Maybe we should backtrack before we dig into what the club does for conservation too. I think we should talk about why get in a club, right? So think about it this way. Even if you only get the chance to steelhead fish once or twice, but you're passionate about it, or any club that's protecting the fishery, it is the speaking voice from the anglers to the Division of Wildlife divisions, regardless of what state you're in. If it's Michigan Steelheaders, New York Steelheaders, Guide Service, but Tom is the leading driving force to keep, I don't like to use the word pressure on the ODNR, but I think we should say maybe keep them in check, Tom. I think that's a really good thing, is that we have 330 members, and it's nothing to do with votes, but I think, it's like, oh, geez, the steelheaders really are taking notice that we're not stocking enough. We should, they throw us a little dog bone or appease us with some type of meeting. But I think it's really good for clubs and the Division of Wildlife divisions to communicate well, which they do with you. Excellent. They invite us. So that's one reason you need to join the club. And then the tournaments, some people aren't into the tournament thing, but it's a catch and release tournament. But I will say one thing that's really interesting is it gives the platform of how the fisheries health really is. Like if we send out 25 anglers out there that day and no one gets, if the fishing conditions are good and we only bring in 4 or 5 fish, we can bring that data to the state and saying, hey, it's sort of like a mini Creel survey, Tom. But that's just think about getting in your local club. Think about joining the Steelheaders, even if you're in the West Coast, just to keep up on the notes and the newsletters to see what's going on in our area. But now let's dig in a little bit about conservation. That's something that I think people don't realize that we do too. Is why don't you explain what else we do for maybe the the river cleanups and stuff, Tom?
Yeah, we've been supportive of river cleanups pretty much, probably for the last 25 years, roughly.
Man.
Yeah, it's been a while. Time flies. It really does. We had, one of the ones I'm most proud of is we started an Ashtabula River cleanup. The Ashtabula River actually came off of the EPA listed, pollution list. It came off of there about 4 or 5 years ago, and I was at a meeting. We were talking about that, and it's like, well, they cleaned up the water, but there's really a lot of trash. There's a lot of homeless people that live along the river, and there's just a lot of trash there. I said, that river really needs a good cleanup. So we partnered with the Ashtabula Soil and Water District and started the cleanups. And this year will be our 4th annual one on Saturday, April the 12th. But every year we've taken out 6 to 10 or 12 tons. Actually, tons of litter off of the Ashtabula River. I mean, it's really made a big improvement. That's probably the one I'm most proud of. But we also partner every year, and this is our 22nd year this year, with the Conneaut Creek cleanup, and that's going to be this Saturday, May the 3rd. And we've been working. We originally started with the Friends of Conneaut Creek, and they evolved into the Scenic River Advisory Group. And we have been there to support all 22 of the cleanups. Often we have more people coming from our club than from the local area to do the cleanups, and that has really made, I think, a big difference in the fishery there, in the watershed. Grand River also has a cleanup, and we've been supporting that over the years. That's going to be this Saturday, May the 24th. And we started supporting the Grand River cleanups back in the 1990s in partnership with the old Grand River Partners. And that was the group that evolved into the Western Reserve Land Conservancy, or they had been absorbed by the Western Reserve Land Conservancy. And right now, the Western Reserve Land Conservancy does take the lead in the Grand River cleanup, and it's a land and a canoe-based cleanup, generally from Harpersfield down to Hidden Valley. And also the Rocky River cleanup. This is going to be the 23rd annual Rocky River cleanup this Saturday, June the 7th. And we've worked with the Metro Parks and Rocky River watershed partners over the last 23 cleanups. And that's one of the rivers. It's actually pretty clean. The Metro Parks does a good job of keeping that area clean, but there is still trash for us to pick up there. So
yeah, it seems like you said, you don't realize how fast, one good thing about getting old is that, you have a lot of experience, but it's like the first time we cleaned up Conneaut, I remember that we get assigned to our little areas. You didn't have to go really far to get like your entire day's worth. And it was like now 20 years later, we go back and we assign geographic areas along the river. And it's sometimes hard to find trash now. So I think 20 years of hard work, 75 tires, we've had canoes in, back busting ropes and tractors getting stuck. Remember the last time we got Andy's tractor stuck cleaning up another section?
I do remember that.
Yeah, right. So it's like the cleanups are really good for the ecosystem, but I will say it is a great place to interact with the other club members, right? We have a good time afterwards. We don't do it 8 hours. We just basically do it for a half a day. We eat pizzas, we talk fishing stories, and so if you have time, even if you're not in Ohio, or if you have your favorite river cleanup in your own home state, I highly recommend that you get into it. It's a good way to interact with your fisheries and keep the water systems, clean. But
one other comment I wanted to make on that too is one thing I'm going to try to promote more with the club this year is I take just when you go to the grocery store, you get the little plastic bags. I try to take a couple of those and put them in my vest.
Yeah.
And when I'm out walking back to my car or I'm in a parking area and I see some trash, I always pick it up. I said, you want to keep our rivers clean, and you don't want to have that, a bad impression of the anglers here going in littering. So.
Right. And you did a great job leading everybody, all the presidents and everybody. It's peer pressure, right, Tom? I don't think it's members that are involved with an association or a club that are doing the trash and getting the bad black eye on that whole fishery. I think everybody is really nice to each other. I think that, but that's a great tip. Put the bag in the back or backpack, or stuff it down your waders, put a beer can or two in there. It can't hurt. It's a great tip, man. But so talk a little about the grant, the grant project and the Scenic River, how things changed. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we've been supporting kids fishing really ever since I've been in the club. Generally, in the beginning, we would send volunteers to the kids' fishing derbies. And we would also, pay for lunch or donate some money towards the event. But the Division of Wildlife created a grant program about 10 years ago. And we apply for grants from the Division of Wildlife where they get money from the sale of licenses. I think it's coming from a federal fund. And we apply for grants as well as we put club money into each event. But we've been donating about $10,000 to the Cleveland Metro Parks, who has 3 events. They have the 2 East and West Side Kids Derby in May, and then they also have a fall family fishing derby. We donate money to the Medina Kids Fishing Derby that they have as part of their Earth Day celebration. And we also donate to the Lake County Metro Parks. They have a spring kids fishing derby and then also a fall family fishing derby. And, we've been doing that. Our members also volunteer to go and help teach the kids to fish because basically they are our future. And basically the money we donate generally goes to mostly to stocking as well as, buying, the different supplies that are necessary to run the events. And we also get very involved with we're trying to get more involved now with the Scenic Rivers committees. We are regularly attending the Conneaut Creek, Ashtabula, and Grand River Scenic River meetings, try to support conservation on all our steelhead tributaries, and, trying to get involved. And I know at the last Conneaut Creek advisory meeting, which was last week, we agreed to put up some new signs for the, along with the Division of Wildlife. There's one we're going to be putting in at Keefus Road, and a new sign that we're going to be putting in at the center or the Creek Road bridge area.
Fish to Fly Guide Service is dedicated to sharing the incredible fly fishing opportunities around Jackson Hole. Whether floating the scenic Snake River in search of native cutthroat trout or hiking into the mountains to explore pristine tributaries, every day on the water is an adventure. You can join them for an unforgettable fly fishing experience in the heart of the Tetons at fishtofly.com. San Juan Rodworks started with a simple belief: great fly rods and gear shouldn't cost a fortune. As a family-run company, they focus on building high-quality fly fishing products that perform on the water without the premium price tag. You can try San Juan Rodworks for 30 days risk-free right now, and if you're not satisfied, send it back for a full refund. You can go to sanjuanrodworks.com. That's SANJUAN rodworks.com.
That's great, Tom. I think the Scenic River program, and then we should probably, now this would be a good time to interject and just for the info and what exactly and how, if you do approach any of the streams in Ohio and in Pennsylvania to do some steelhead fishing along the south shores of Lake Erie, is let's talk a little bit about, just because it's deemed a scenic river, doesn't allow you just to roam freely like a national park does it. Let's talk a little bit about, the rules, the do's and the don'ts about stream access.
Yeah, like you said, if it's a scenic river, that's really just putting in some rules to protect the fishery, where you cannot, cut down all the trees up to the bank that is going to create erosion and things. It's sort of an agreement between the landowners to preserve, basically the wild and scenic aspects of the river. So no, that does not give you permission to fish there. You really, obviously, there's only scenic rivers. They all have either the Ashtabula or Lake County Metro Parks have public access areas. But if you're not on a Metro Park area or a public fishing area, you really have to ask permission from the landowner. And that's whether it's posted or not. Obviously, if someone doesn't want you there, they're going to post it. If it's not posted, you're still really not permitted to go there. The landowner owns the land underneath the water. So if you're wading in or fishing in the water on their property, that's trespassing. So you really need to get permission from the landowners to be able to fish, even though it is a scenic river.
Yeah. No, the interesting thing is that, we have these little runoff rivers, and if people are just tuning in, let's just make sure this is Ohio and Pennsylvania. This is not in Michigan. So Michigan has different rules and regulations. But in the majority of New York and Pennsylvania and Ohio, these rules apply. And I think the best way to access this is if you go to the DNR sites, they actually have stream maps that will show you the public access areas and the private ones. Every river has quite a bit of public, and I think as we dig into this, Tom and I will start talking a little bit about reasons why you stock certain streams is just how many miles of public access compared to private. We'll dig into that a little bit, but I think it's important to know where you stand, that the landowners own the bottom of the river, and for sure that you should be as polite as you possibly can if you are in doubt of where you're at, if you get approached. Make sure you approach it like the landowner is talking to you, not some rude angler that has the right to go fishing there. But well, that's good, Tom. I think we clarified that. You want to add anything else about that, about the access and that?
Not really. I mean, there is a lot of public access. So,
Yes.
The metro parks have really done a great job of them along with, I know the Western Reserve has purchased a lot of property along, but if you're fishing, Conneaut Creek probably has the least amount of public access, but from Creek Road down, it's pretty much the good majority of that's public. The Ashtabula, from the hospital area all the way up to the covered bridge, that's all a public area. And, the Grand River has quite a few metro parks there, and as well as the Chagrin and the Rocky. The Rocky River is almost all public access. And the Vermilion has quite a bit of Lake or Lorain County metro parks access there, too. So all these rivers, there's plenty of areas, and good areas, too, to fish. You can get on public access there.
Yeah, I mean, thanks to Steve Madewell, he was the deputy director of Lake County, which has a lot of the streams flow and the tributaries flow in it. He had the foresight to really put pressure on the board of directors to purchase land in advance to give us lots of areas. But maybe we should touch base about how Pennsylvania was able to instill a Lake Erie access and trout salmon sort of stamp, a little extra fee, and what they're doing with that, buying land. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on what they're got going?
Yeah, they have a trout stamp, the Steelhead or Lake Erie stamp, I should call it, that you pay for with your fishing license each year, and they use that fund either to purchase land or to purchase easements. In the case of the easements, the landowner still owns a property, but they're giving permission to anglers to access the river in their area, and that has been a very successful program. I don't have the exact numbers here, but it's many miles of additional access that they've opened up for anglers with that program.
Yeah, I think the foresight of all this is won't happen when I'm on this side of the dirt, but if you get a little piece of easement, it might only be a small piece that really is not enough to open to the public, and then you get another mile away, you have another landowner that deeds it over to the children or whatever, and now you have these two small pieces. And then all of a sudden, the connected properties between the two, 15 years later, comes available. Now you can open up this corridor, like recently they opened it up, that it could be over a half a mile of river section. So it's a wait and see type game, but it's like very important to look down the future for the generations to be able to access these rivers. Like I said, for me and you, we've seen a lot of growth, but I think it's only going to get better as we understand how to manage the fishery and how to get the landowners on board with the farmers and everybody else too. But
yeah, and one of the things I'd have to add to that is definitely be respectful when you're out there on the rivers. That if you have permission to fish in someone's property, be very careful, because sometimes when the reasons some of the properties get shut down is because of bad behavior by certain anglers.
Yeah. Not only to the landowner, but imagine yourself to be kind to the etiquette to the other anglers that are on the stream. Everybody from people canoeing to the aluminum hats up in Michigan. Everybody has the right to the water. We're all fighting to get there on the water and enjoy a day. But I would say always ask permission from your fellow angler. Like if it's really crowded, say, hey, do you mind me jumping in on the top of this run and fishing with you? Or, hey, how long you been there? And just open a conversation rather than assuming that, you're going to squeeze in there. Pennsylvania is a little bit different. It's got a high pressure amount of anglers, as you know, and it's shoulder to shoulder. And I think what they call combat fishing, right? Anywhere.
Yep.
New York has it too. But everybody work with everybody. Support if there's any excess stamps or extra fees. Support that, and then I don't know. Let's see. Let's move on to the Steelhead program because it's changed dramatically. So maybe we should just start and fill in to everybody how it's going and where it's going.
Yeah, the history of the Ohio Steelhead, basically, I think they originally started stocking salmon, didn't they, Jeff?
They did. They had the Coho and the Chinook salmon program. And my first club that I involved with was the Chagrin River Salmon Association in 1971. And salmon, of course, brought out legal snagging, which you can only imagine what type of circus that was in the Great Lakes. So, but those eventually, and maybe I should probably clarify about this. So the salmon, because of you could snag them, and then they allowed snagging. So then people would do take a dowel fly jig and turn the hook sidewards, and they would still snag them. The drawback with the salmon is that once it returns into the river system to try to reproduce, it perishes. It goes away. So you're paying the same amount of money for that, comparatively speaking, to a rainbow or a genetically steelhead type strain they don't die after they spawn. They go out to the lake, regardless if it's the ocean or the Great Lakes, and they come back in multiple times, sometimes as many as 6 years. But generally speaking, 3 to 4, 5 being that, 6 is a questionable. But yeah, Tom, so maybe you can just start elaborating where it started and we can work our way through.
Yeah, so they weren't getting the best, I guess, return for their money. They didn't have enough salmon returning, I guess, for the investment. So they made a decision around the 1980s that they were going to switch over to a steelhead. And they started out with a London strain, which was an Ohio-developed strain it was actually a domestic rainbow. It actually wasn't even a steelhead. I think they called it a steelhead, but it was really a domestic rainbow. And it returned in pretty good numbers in the fall, but that was it. It didn't really come back in the winter and the spring. And one of the issues they had with these fish, because they were domestic rainbows, not steelhead, is when they'd stocked them in the lower section of the rivers, a lot of them just stayed there and they didn't really go back out in the lake and then return. They didn't have that genetics of a steelhead. So they went along with that. And then around 1993, they went with a fall stocking because they wanted to try to save some money. So that way, they would hatch the eggs in the spring and they'd raise them to be maybe 3 or 4 inches. They would stock them in the fall. That way they didn't have to pay to feed them, et cetera, to grow them until the spring. Well, that was a bad decision, they did that for 3 years, and the fishery pretty much crashed. And that was one of the times when, with the club, there was a lot of controversy, a lot of discussion with the Division of Wildlife. What are you guys doing? The program's really falling apart. And at that time, Phil Hillman, and I think Kevin Kale, they studied different options, and they decided to go with a wild steelhead, which was coming from the Little Manistee River in Michigan. So they decided at that time that the fall stocking wasn't working, so they went to a spring stocking. And one of the big differences there is having a fish that's 7, 8 inches, maybe 9 inches long, their stocking, that has a better survival rate, I think a lot of the smaller fish they stocked in the spring just became fish food and never grew to a mature fish that would come back. So starting in 1996, we started stocking 100% Manistee fish, which was a major improvement. That's a true steelhead, a wild steelhead. It was excellent at survival, being able to go out where they were estimating. I think the Londons were coming back at 1 or 2% return. The Manistees were coming back at 10, 12% returns, which was great.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And then in 1997, one of the big things, additions, or the key one to our steelhead fishery today, is that there was a private trout farm, I guess you'd call it, in Castalia that went bankrupt, and it was up for sale. And some of the people in the club, as well as some of the other local politicians and anglers, really advocated for purchasing that, and I know some of the club members worked with Governor Voinovich to convince him that, hey, this is a good deal. So they ended up purchasing the Castalia Fish Hatchery for $1.35 million in 1997, and that really gave them a really great facility, as well as one of the biggest issues with raising trout or steelhead in Ohio is having that cold water source. So with the blue holes there, they had a great cold water source. So starting in 1997, they were able to get eyed eggs from Michigan that were from the Manistee, and they were able to start raising them. And we had Manastees. They went great. They went from about 200,000 the first couple of years of the hatchery up to around the year 2001. They went over 400,000 and stocked Manastees all the way up through about 20 years, all the way up through 2016. And the Manistee created a great fishery. They're strong fish. Mostly come back in the winter and the spring, but if you have good fall rains and that, you will get some fish coming back in the fall as well. And then in 2016, we started to have some issues. Michigan wasn't able to supply us with all the eggs that we needed for the program. So the Division of Wildlife reached out to Wisconsin and started to get the Chambers Creek and Ganaraska strain of fish. And from 2016 really until 2020, there was a mixture of Manistee, Chambers Creek, and Ganaraskas, and that created an excellent fishery.
Yeah,
we really thought the Manistee fishery was good, which it was. And then when you added in these Chambers Creek and Ganaraska fish, you really had the diversity, I think, really improved the steelhead returns for sure.
So, this is a really good point now. So there's a lot of veterans maybe going to listen to the podcast here, and there's going to be a lot of just people are just like in wonder of like, why is the fishery better in the spring, better in the the winter, why in the fall? Mother Nature has a lot to do with it, which we'll get into. But let's just clarify one thing: is that there are spring spawning fish, there are winter spawners, and then there's fall. So depending on the strain determines when the run's going to be. But the 20 years of Manastees, it was very predictable. These fish, like Tom said, would come in. But when we get a fish in the hatchery, if it's the eyed egg, it takes an entire year for that fish to mature to what's called a smolting stage. And that's generally in April. So we get it in April. They get the eyed eggs. They hatch in the hatchery. 1 year later, they're around anywhere from 6 to 9 inches. Tom was saying that. When they go through that smolting process is when the states sort of want to stock these fish because that's sort of like their homing device. That's when they imprint to the rivers, and hopefully the rivers that we stock, those fish come back. So when we put them in the river systems, they're already 1 year old. So when they come back, Tom, what are they usually around 19 to 21 inches first year or something like that?
Yep.
Yeah. So, they get about that. And then a 5-year-old Manistee, usually I'd say is close to 30 inches, right?
Easy, 30 or over 30. That's really a trophy in Ohio. 30-inch and above fish, that's a trophy.
I think it's a trophy anywhere. British Columbia, Alaska, 30-inch fish, regardless of what it is. That's a heck of a fish to be swimming around in these little runoff rivers that run into Lake Erie. Michigan, on an average, coming into Lake Michigan stuff, their average is probably a little bit larger than ours overall. I think that's declined a little bit, but they have a potential to get a 20-pounder like Lake Ontario fish too. But we've only seen a few of those in Ohio. But so now Tom was talking about this potpourri of a mixture of spring and fall diversity fish. And I agree 100%. These fish from Wisconsin adapted quickly. We're still catching a few of them. And I think it just made a great diversity of fish. And maybe, Tom, tell us experiences like what made that program, that diversity, what made it so special for us in the last 4 or 5 years?
Just the returns of just big fish. I think that's what everyone was really impressed with. That These are just such hard fighting fish. They come in out of the lake and they just, you get them on your line and look out. They're going to make 4 or 5 jumps. They're going to tail walk. And, you really got to be on your game to be able to land some of these fish. And they were just, the Wisconsin and the Michigan, the little manistee fish, they're just like hard fighters, and they're true steelhead. They have that genetics that make them, want to come back and spawn in the rivers as opposed to a domestic rainbow. But they're just an excellent quality of steelhead.
Yeah, I agree. Dave from Wet Fly Swing came up, and we had a couple years where we hosted a trip, and Dave came in, and he was pretty impressed about the fishery, and he happened to hit that potpourri of fish. But I do believe those fish came to a swung fly better, even better than the manastees, because the manastees have a tendency to jump gravel really fast, and they get in the boom boom room, and they just get a little hard to get on the swung fly once in a while until they get done spawning again. But the Wisconsin fish, they seem to be getting on it, and we talked to their, the outfitters and everybody, and they tend to agree with it. So we had that. Let's see, according to the paperwork we got here, Tom, it looks about 5 years of that potpourri, didn't we?
Yes, we did, and that really, like I said, that created a great fishery. Then in 2021, with COVID, not that this is really a bad thing, but right. The weirs in both Michigan and Wisconsin were closed. So the Division of Wildlife went to a backup plan. We were able to go to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Commission. They were able to get Shasta, which are Shasta and Fish Lake domestic rainbows. And they were able to stock almost 500,000 of those in 2021. And since then, I guess we've had a combination of Michigan and Wisconsin fish for the last 5 years. And the fishery has still been very good. I mean, the majority, about 2/3, is the wild manastees as well as the Wisconsin strain, and about 1/3 has been the Shastas. And I guess there's some studies going on right now to determine the return rate on the Shastas to see if they're going to return in good numbers. But our preference, and I guess what our club has advocated for, is to get back to a mixture of the little manistee fish and the Chambers Creek and Ganaraska strain of steelhead, and we really would like those 3. And the Shastas are probably okay rather than missing a year class of fish, but there's the word is still out. I know the Bowling Green is doing a study right now for 2 years, this year and next year, where if people are harvesting a steelhead, they're asking for the head, and then they're studying the otolith bone, which is the ear bone, and they're able to determine, the origin of the fish and a lot of the details of it. So they're trying to study the return rates of the little manastees, the Wisconsin fish, as well as the Shastas, and try to have some facts to back up. I guess what we all know is that the wild fish, the actual steelhead, do return better.
Sometimes they need it on paper, right, Tom?
Exactly. We need some data and charts to support that.
But there's the fudge factor in there too.
Yeah, and one of the things too, though, is a lot of people say they know how to tell the difference between them, but honestly, I don't. I mean, I look at it one and I say, I think that's a manistee, but you really have to take a scale sample and have it tested to really know for sure.
Yeah, everybody says, oh, that's a Skamania, that's this and that. I was like, the only way you could really tell is when you had 20 years of stocking manastees, it was pretty obvious what they were. But when you start throwing in the mixed bag and PA's fish and everything else, I think you can't tell them, like you said, Tom.
And that's a good point, too. I know in Ohio we get a lot of strays from Pennsylvania to help supplement our fishery. And I'm sure some of our fish stray over to Pennsylvania and New York as well.
When it comes to premium flies that deliver results, drifthook.com is the name to trust this season. Whether you're chasing trout with dry flies, swinging streamers, or dialing in those Euro nymphs, they've got everything you need. Here's a quick story. I was fishing a tricky spring creek earlier this year and nothing was working. Then I pulled out a Royal Wolf from the drift hook box. I cast upstream, letting it drift effortlessly toward a holding fish. It was textbook. One of the biggest fish in the run rose, sipped the fly, and the fight was on. That's definitely a moment I'll never forget. Their fly kits ship free straight to your door, fully stocked and ready for action. You can support a great small business right now in this podcast by heading over to drifthook.com today. That's Drifthook, DRIFTHOOK. Use the code SWING at checkout to get 15% off your first order. Step into the world where the river whispers and the fishing is nothing short of legendary. This year, I ventured into the heart of eastern Idaho's Yellowstone Teton territory where the fish were larger than life and the waters held the secrets of the best fly fishing out west. Yellowstone Teton territory is not just a location, it's a gateway to adventures that will etch themselves into your memory. With crystal clear rivers like the Henry's Fork and the South Fork of the Snake, and enough lakes to keep you going all year long, make your way to Yellowstone Teton territory and embark on a journey to one of North America's finest fly fishing destinations. Whether you're planning your trip now or just dreaming it up, the YTT is where those dreams turn into reality. Remember, Yellowstone Teton territory. That's Teton, T-E-T-O-N. It's time to experience Eastern Idaho for yourself and support this podcast at the same time.
So where does that bring us to, like, the most important part we have to start thinking about as an angler when we do this is that because these fish are only in the systems and within our grasp for about 4 to 5 years, since COVID now, we're getting to that. So what do we got going on in the program now?
Well, right now in Castalia, they have about 450,000 fish they're raising. 250,000 are from Wisconsin. Actually, 10,000 are from Pennsylvania. I guess they're doing a little experiment to see if gathering some of the eggs from Pennsylvania, if that's a good egg source, I guess. And there's also 190,000 Shasta domestic rainbows in there. So roughly 60% will be Steelhead strain, and about 40% will be domestic rainbows. It'll be stocked this spring. And the goal this spring is to really get all Manistee and Wisconsin eggs for the program.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, we can only, hope. We had a lobby when we were very beginning, like you said, Tom. We're down here in Columbus just to get this from London, Ohio strain. We lobbied down in Columbus, and we tried to be a squeaky wheel, and that worked, but their hands are sort of tied with the divisions of, like, they can only supply so many eggs. And just to go on record, there's a lot of people are trying to think that, why doesn't Ohio just get our own hatchery and our own little weir that we can weir them on? But it's a little more complicated than that to be self-sustaining, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, there has been a lot of discussion about getting a weir in Ohio, but you'd have to close down a section of one of our rivers or a tributary for a period in the springtime to collect the eggs and that. And that may be an answer in the future, but for right now, actually, my preference is really to get the little Manistee is a great strain, as well as the Wisconsin fish. So as long as we're able to get eggs from them, that I think that's really a great fish. And it really improves the genetics of, I think, the steelhead in Lake Erie. I mean, it's you're bringing these wild steelhead in, and like they're gonna spawn with the other fish that are here, and it's gonna, I think, improve their genetics.
Yeah, absolutely. And we could this podcast alone, we could just talk about this because most of the Canadian fish that are going up into the Canadian waters are wild or self-sustaining because they don't stock that many there. So we got a pretty diverse fishery all over the Great Lakes. And so let's take a little look now. We've got the stocking program. We'll talk a little bit about how to approach spring fish and fall fish when you have different weathers later on. But let's just see, what about the latest stocking in 2024? Pretty big event when we stock the river that burned a couple of times, right?
Oh yeah, the Cuyahoga River, right? That's a real success story, I think. And probably most everybody listening knows. But what was it? That was back in the '60s that the Cuyahoga River burned, and really got a lot. It actually burned many times back then.
Just that once.
But one time it burned really bad and got national news, and that was really what started the Clean Water Act. And the Cuyahoga River, was the poster child for being a polluted river. And what would that be? 50 years probably of a lot of work has cleaned that river up to the point where now it can support a run of steelhead. And it did have some stray steelhead that would run up in there. But starting last spring, we stocked it, or the state of Ohio stocked it with 65,000 steelhead, and plan to stock it each spring from this point forward. And, the fish, it opens up a whole lot. We talked about access. Being able to fish the Cuyahoga opens up, I think it was like 35, 36 miles of additional public access through the national park, as well as the Cleveland and Summit County metro parks also have a lot of public access there. So it's really, and the Cuyahoga is really a very beautiful river, and there's a lot of great fishing opportunities there. And it also opens up fishing for the people down more in the city. So the mouth of the Cuyahoga is right in the middle of downtown Cleveland, and there's a lot of people down there that really maybe can't afford waders or don't have a boat to go out, so they're able to fish from the piers and the rocks, and they're able to catch steelhead.
Yeah, I think it's going to offer a challenge for the walk and wade angler. It'll offer more opportunities for somebody that wants to float and get away. But there's something to say about, yes, could you go down to your local river and catch a few fish, but you're going to have a pretty good community with you. But there's something to say about when you get to a bridge and you get away from the bridge and you start fishing the river with an opportunity to catch one of these fish, and you look upstream and downstream most of the day and you don't see another angler. I think the Cuyahoga is going to bring that asset back that we haven't had for a while in our area, because the fishery is so popular now, right?
Oh yeah, that solitude of being able to get away and just chill out and enjoy the day, the nature. You see eagles flying by and all kinds of other types of birds, ducks, geese, deer. Who knows what else will become running? Otters, all kinds of things running by you.
Yeah, man, it's going to be. I'm excited to dive into all this. I'm excited for everybody who's going to try. The ODNR sort of went against the national park, didn't want these fish stocked, and the ODNR took a hard stand. And thanks to Scott Hale and Kurt Wagner, they said, nope, we're putting them in. Hopefully we can keep it going, because I think it takes, 1 year doesn't make it a successful fishery, but, we give it 2 or 3 years of stocking the river and we find out that it's not being utilized, then we can make adjustments. But it'll be a good test platform, don't you think?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, just like anything else, like you bring out a product, it's like it takes a little while for people to realize it and figure out how to get in there and everything else. Let's talk a little bit about, we can't talk Michigan and New York a whole lot, but let's talk something that's a little closer to home, which is the PA stocking that, and you're highly involved with the PA steelheaders, with the presidents and Chris over there. Why don't you fill us in what they got going on over there? They got a little hiccup in their program too, don't they?
Yes, they do. And OCBS does work with the PA Steelhead Association, which is a very similar organization. It's based out of Pennsylvania, and we try to work together on different things. But they had an issue with VHS, a VHS scare 2 years ago. And they had the U.S. Department of Agriculture, as well as the PA Department of Agriculture, came in and looked at what they were doing and said they really should not be taking eggs from the Lake Erie or Great Lakes Basin out of it. So they were taking they were raising half of their fish at their Ty Nesta hatchery and half of it at the Fairview hatchery, which is right on the lake. And it was a risk of, when you take eggs, I guess the Great Lakes are considered a disease, the VHS disease waterway. And if you're taken out of there to the Ty Nesta hatchery, you could risk spreading that to other waterways. So they had to stop raising or using the eggs that they take out of Trout Run at Ty Nesta. So what that does is that reduces their capacity from about 1.1 million steelhead to about 500,000 steelhead.
Wow, it's half.
Yep. So last year they started to see that. I think they put in 800,000 instead of 1.1. This spring they'll be putting in about 500,000. And they have a plan to correct that. The primary plan is to build a new hatchery in Fairview, I should say, that will raise about 1 million plus fish a year.
Nice.
And the last I heard, they were in the process of getting the money. I think it's about $25 million approved. And they were working on trying to find enough cold water to support the hatchery there, which they have found that. So, they're probably, another, 4 or 5 years away from having the new hatchery is what it sounds like. One of the other options that they're looking at, too, is they're studying the Shastas, similar to what Ohio is stocking, and seeing if they could get the Shastas from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and be able to raise those at Tionesta. One of the things that they're doing this year, though, too, is because they couldn't raise steelhead at Tionesta, they're going to put in some bonus brown trout. So they were going to stock, it was like 300,000 brown trout.
Yeah, that's what
to
I
kind
heard.
of make up for that.
Everybody's sort of like, that's the whole, like, everybody in Ohio, PA is like brown trout, brown trout, brown trout, right? But
Yep.
So that could be exciting.
Yeah, I think brown trout are real pretty fish. I love to catch them too, but my honest opinion is I like steelhead better.
Yeah, they say that the brown trout do not return as well and don't adapt to Lake Erie as much as that we thought they would. It's just all the gobies and bait fish. You figure this deep water off of Erie, PA, they thought they would just thrive, but even PA says that they're not as, I don't know why it would be not a healthy system, but they just don't get their bang for their buck.
Yeah, and that's what Ohio did. I know back in I think the early 90s, they experimented a little bit with brown trout and decided that that wasn't a good return either for their money.
Yeah, you think New York has got they got it going on, but they really have a big program. But so that brings us sort of up to date where we're at with the program. We're sort of just glazing over it. Feel free to reach out to Dave and myself and even Tom at the Ohio Central Basin Steelheaders if you have any questions, and we can direct you to get all this information that we gather and stuff. But Tom, let's talk a little bit about, we had 2 years of unseasonably mild winters, and then this year, 2025, we've had a typical weather pattern of winter. And let's talk a little bit about fall fish, winter fish, and how it affects your expectations of the fish you're going to try to catch. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. The last year, in the fall, I think we had one of the driest falls we've had in near-term memory. And, most of our rivers were too low and clear to really support the fish coming back. And I know most of last spring I was actually fishing in the Ashtabula Harbor in my kayak, or the Lower Grand, which is our largest river that had some flow. You'd be able to get some fish coming in there. But really the whole fall up until after Thanksgiving was really, the fishing was because of the environmental not getting the rain, and it was rather warm too. We didn't really have that much of a run of fish. So starting in December, we really started to have a lot of fish coming in. The runs were pretty good. And then we had a hard freeze, which we haven't been used to lately.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I think New Year's Day, I think I had a very good day fishing on the Ashtabula. And then basically things froze up for most of the month of January and February. I guess if you were a real diehard, you could go out and maybe catch one by standing at the edge of the shelf ice or something. But really, that shut down fishing until really just ice out was about a week ago.
Yeah. So this is where some of the anglers that have been involved, like yourself and myself and the club members, compared to somebody who's just starting out now, you see them running around in April. They're looking in the shallows, looking for the fish to, on the gravel, spawning in the boom boom room and, do the flossing thing. But that fishery, you have to have spring spawners to come in spring. And if as Tom and I went over, as you do the research, is that we predominantly have been stocking a little more the Shasta fish, or any rainbows are a fall spawner. Then we have the Wisconsin fish, which are winter spawners. So we've had some little manistee stock, but this is the reason why Mother Nature, of course, too, will have influence with the rain flows, like Tom says. You have an influence of, like, the last 2 years, April fishing has been pretty non-existent in our area because of the lack of spring. So that's why I was like, what's happened to the fish? Well, you basically just have to adapt to what those fish are. So if you have to fish in some crummy weather conditions through the slush in the winter, but we were blessed that we had some mild winters, that we were able to really catch a bunch of nice fish, but they're pretty much done by April. So now I saw that we did get a good push of little manastees in 2024. So that over 300,000 of those, I think just by us, that shotgun approach, whatever we can get, it actually will keep just enough spring fish for us to get catching the fish, don't you think?
Yeah. And I think the last couple of years too, with a very mild winter, those fish were spawning almost all winter. I mean, we never really had, that. I mean, I don't think the fish really care. I think once the water temperatures warm up to over 40 degrees and the conditions are right, they're going to spawn whether it's April or February. So I think the last couple of years we didn't have a lot of fish in the spring, late spring, because they all spawned in January and February. Whereas this year I think we have a lot more fish coming in the spring because I think most of them are still out in the lake waiting to come in.
Yeah, we had this conversation before we started the episode, is that, so the interesting thing now is that we predominantly have had fall and winter spawn fish stocked, but they weren't able to get in with low water. And with a really severe winter, there is a thing that happens when a steelhead can't get into its natal river because of unforeseen conditions, and it can't find another adjacent river to go up to spawn. They can actually reabsorb their eggs, and a steelhead does not have to spawn every year. So we're in this holding pattern, holding our breath. The fishing now, we're getting a few fresh fish in now. We're still catching the ones that came in and over the winter, but the fishing's still a little slow. And we're wondering if these fall fish can genetically adapt and say, we're coming in now and spawning in the springtime, comparatively speaking, or are they going to go back out and just stay in the lake and not come in? So the consensus is still out, Tom. I think that's going to be, you and I are going to find out, everybody else, right?
Yep. Hopefully they're still coming in.
Yeah, Tom educated me a little bit. We did a little research. Like we don't bonk many steelhead and keep them, but some of the boat anglers that catch these fish out in the boat early season in May and that, they have egg sacs and milt in them, but there's a black residue that's up on the top of their body cave that is eggs that were reabsorbed into their system. And we will be interested to see what happens here.
Yeah, I never realized years before that they did reabsorb their eggs. I always thought that they just spawn no matter what, but I was surprised to learn that some of them just don't spawn and reabsorb the eggs back into them.
I think Mother Nature just protects itself one way or another.
Yep.
The ones that squeak in when there's no water on their upside down, squeaking through 2 inches of water, and the other ones are saying, not for me, I'm going out to the lake and go get fat again.
Yeah. I think some of them might spawn in the harbors too, in some of those areas. But
yeah, I would expect, especially the lake trout and the brown trout for sure. And even like a mouth of a creek, right? You could get a mouth of the creeks that come in, as long as there's a little flow and you got the right, the composition of the bottom, they can definitely spawn there for sure.
Yep.
But well, I think let's move on. We got a little bit of time left. Let's talk a little bit about a fishing tip. So we talked about all sorts of things, but let's give them a little nugget. What would be a really good tip? Like when you're going, you catch a lot of fish. What would be a good tip for a beginning angler to sort of focus on first?
I guess it depends on the style of fishing, but let's just say I really think the easiest way to catch a steelhead is usually with a jig under a float. That's a lot of times what I'll tell people. You don't have to worry about the getting that right drift or anything, but getting just a jig. I know I like voodoo jigs. But there's all kinds of jigs. A lot of people tie their own jigs. But just suspending a jig like a 1/32 ounce, like a black marabou jig under a float, about 3 foot under a float, and just work it around a pole or through the runs. I think sometimes that's the easiest way, really, to catch your first steelhead. Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty important to get you would say a specialty steelhead jig that has a little better hook, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You got to have a strong hook for sure.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things with voodoos. They have a very, very strong hook. I've never seen any of them straighten out.
Yeah. The crappie jig would work, but it might not work out real well in the long run.
Yep. Yep. And, for fly fishing, usually use a 10-foot 7 weight. And, usually a good setup is to have a beadhead nymph along with an egg fly. A lot of people in Ohio use the double rig setup. And there's a lot of books written about it. I know John Nagy has a book that goes into great detail, as well as Carl Wexelman has a new book out on that. But just being able to drift that egg pattern with that bead-headed nymph. You want the bead-headed nymph to be able to get your offering down to the bottom where the fish are. Usually the steelhead's going to be in the bottom of whatever you're fishing. Usually in the bottom 1 foot of water. So you want to get your offering down there to them, and you want to have a natural drift. You want to make sure it's flowing at the same speed. Your bait is, or your fly is drifting at the same speed as the water is down there to look natural, or a little slower sometimes.
Yeah, I think a lot of anglers, and this goes for fly with an indicator or center pin or a spinning rod, is that they don't use enough weight, do they, Tom?
Yep. Nope. A lot of times the flies or bait are going right over the steelhead's head, and in the warmer water, they'll move more maybe to take something, but when it's colder, when it's in the 30s and 40s, they don't move quite as far to take something. So you really want to put that offering right in front of their face.
Yeah, the last time me and you fished, I noticed that you actually don't use a lot of split shots. You actually use like a torpedo weight system to balance your float, and then you add smaller shot closer to that. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit why you're loading the float that way, what makes it effective? And
yeah, that's when I'm center pin fishing. A lot of people will use a button down shot pattern, but it takes a lot of time and effort to be putting all those split shot on. So basically, it's about a 1/8 ounce inline sinker that I use, and that's kind of like bulk. That's like bulk shotting it, so that you're getting that bait right down to the bottom where the fish are. And then I'll go with about a 20-inch leader, usually fluorocarbon, about 6 pounds. Might put about 1 BB on there, and depending on the size of the river, I'll go with maybe a 6 or an 8 gram float, and I'll add a couple of pieces of split shot, like right below the float, kind of to balance it out.
oh, okay, and that just gets that bait right down right away.
You want to get it right down to the bottom. Yep.
Yeah, right away.
I actually learned that trick there from Brian Kelly, who's one of the top steelhead fishermen in this area.
Yeah, he just texted me now. He's fishing and we're talking, which is good. So monofilament or braid from the reel to that float into your inline sinker, monofilament or braid?
No, I always use mono.
Okay.
Yeah. Braid doesn't have stretch to it, and you really want it to have stretch when you're fighting these fish. And the braid does tend to freeze up when it gets colder. It doesn't fish as well in the cold weather. So I just go with the mono.
Okay, great. And you mentioned that. You mentioned the jig to start out with. Would you use the jig with the inline sinker, or is that something you wouldn't?
No, usually if I'm fishing the jig, I'll take that inline sinker off, and I'll just run the jig under the float and maybe balance the float with a couple split shot underneath the float.
Okay.
But you really want that. I'll tell you what's the best way I like to do it is I like to put a slip float on. Oh. And that way I set the float stoppers so there's about maybe a foot of play.
Okay.
So that you kind of give it a little twitch, and that gives that jig a little up and down action while you're drifting it. And
that's a good
lot
tip.
of times that little twitching, that little movement is what will get this steelhead to strike.
Yeah, especially in those really slow, tanky winter pools when the water's cold, huh?
Yep, absolutely. And I've seen where you'll have a pack of or a school of steelhead sitting there, and it's pretty clear water, and nobody seems like they want to hit it, and you kind of twitch it a couple of times, and then one of those steelhead, for whatever reason, from that pack just comes out and just bangs it.
Change the speed, change the direction. You get the bully of the pack, right?
Kamikaze.
Yeah. Well, those are great tips. That one with the slip float, that's like inside intel from an angler like yourself who spends countless hours on the river now. You're retired from your full-time job. You're running the club. I can't thank you enough for that. But I'm going to leave a little story that me and you had, and this is over 20 years, right? I'm sure it was, Tom, right?
Yeah.
So there's always a little fishing story. And just to go on record, I've been a lot of places, and I'm sure Tom has too, and we've been to Michigan together, but you could catch as many fish as you want, but the story that always sticks in your mind has nothing to do with the fish catching. It's always about what happens and that. Well, we were on Elk Creek a long time ago, and we're running around with our chickens with the head cut up because we want to catch as many fish as we can. It's pouring down rain, and I have my Patagonia raincoat on, and Tom was smart enough to take his off, and he throws it in the back of the truck, and we jump out of the truck, and I wasn't even thinking. I'm already wearing my raincoat, and I took your raincoat because it's a little bigger, put it on top of mine, And then you go, where's my raincoat? And then we're swearing, we're cussing, we're thinking where we are. And then you looked at me and you're like, Jeff, you have 2 raincoats on.
Yeah, that was funny, Jeff. That was.
Remember, like, I was so like in the zone. I was like, only thing I could think about was like catching like fish brain, catch another steelhead. But that was a pretty good time, Tom. I can't thank you enough for coming on. Could you maybe tell the listeners where they could get a hold of you and the club and how to go about being a member, whatever? Anybody?
Yeah, we have a website. It is, you could go to www.ohiosteelheaders.com. And if you have any questions for me or anything about the club or fishing in general, we do have a contact me tab there. That email goes directly to me. We do have a membership tab there on the website too that you can join and pay for your membership with PayPal there right online. Or everyone's always welcome at our meetings. You don't have to be a member to attend. We do have on our website, we have a scheduled meeting. So if you're interested in the club, just show up and see if you like it. Like I said, we all our meetings, we do have a very good speaker, someone that's going to be hopefully providing some information to make you a better angler, as well as there's a lot of camaraderie at the meetings. A lot of networking. You could talk to other people and see what they're doing, where they're fishing. Everyone's usually pretty open. And our next meeting actually is going to be on Thursday, March the 27th. That's a West Side meeting, which will be at the Emerald Necklace Marina. We're going to have Roger Hinchcliffe, who's the Steelhead Manifesto. He's a Lamiglass pro. In fact, actually, he's now, I think, vice president of Lamiglass. He's based out of Michigan, though. He's going to talk about spring float fishing for drop-back steelhead, so that's appropriate for that. And then we have our last meeting of this season, which is going to be April the 17th. That'll be an East Side meeting at the Firehouse, and we're going to have John Brochu, who's the Orvis Westlake manager. He's also a fly fishing instructor, and he's going to talk about spring smallmouth bass on the fly. And I know we're a steelhead club, but we have a program about smallmouth, but typically most of our members will transition from steelhead into smallmouth in the spring, usually starting around April, May. And we also have a very good run of lake run smallmouth in most of our rivers that we catch some monster smallies that are not as much fun as steelhead, but almost as much fun as steelhead.
It's a crossover, man. That's a lot of great intel. I mean, it's a remote drinking location. All the speakers generally give a great, lots of information. I want to thank all the listeners again for tuning in. Thank Tom again. And if you have any suggestions or you want to hear a certain podcast about something, reach out to Dave or myself, and we would be more than happy to answer your questions, get a podcast you want. I've got a couple coming up with one of the fishiest dudes I know here, Phil Cook in Michigan. We're going to talk all about really getting into some fish brain stuff. And then I've got Eric Kagruski, who's going to be the muskie star of Lake St. Clair. So that's what's coming up. Thanks for the listen, and catch you on the next one.